challenge. So how do you indeed get your point across when you're in that kind of situation? Is that a fair characterization? Did I have that happen? The answer is absolutely. I think many of us have had challenges being heard in rooms for a variety of reasons. So there's a couple of techniques. One is, if you find that happening, and now I'm going to go back to allies, it's rare that you're in meetings, especially early on in your career, where every single meeting you're with people that you don't know or have never worked with before. Typically, you're in meetings, the same kinds of groups come together. So find an ally. Find an ally, and you guys have a deal. Remember we talked about cheerleader? It's kind of another way of being a cheerleader. And you have a deal. Listen, when I make a point, I want you to come back and attribute it to me. And let me explain what I'm saying. So I start talking, and I say, I think the sky is blue. People start talking over it, blah, 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 blah. Everybody forgets the sky is blue. Or, worst case, somebody else says the sky is blue, and everybody says, Stuart, that was a great idea. You're right, the sky is blue. And you're like, heck, I said that. So what you do is you get your ally to say, Stuart, I'm so glad you reinforced the point that Ann just made. Right? Or you do it yourself. Stuart, thank you so much. I was having trouble articulating it as clearly as you just did. Now what you've done is you've complimented Stuart and you've taken the credit. So the key is learning how to pull it back so that it comes back to you. And you can use others, you can do it yourself, but you have to do it. If you just sit there and stew, it doesn't work. And oh, by the way, it's not just women who have trouble being heard. I mean, so we feel it a lot, but honestly, it's not just women. There are a lot of folks that are not as confident when they speak or not as loud when they speak, and they get talked over just as much. So use the exact same approach. The other one is when people start talking over you. So I start talking, and Alfredo starts talking over me. I say, Alfredo, just a minute, I actually wasn't through. So you jump in and assert yourself, which is another way of doing that. What else would I say? The other thing, and this is really bold, but I've done it twice. You stand up. Everybody's sitting down at the table. So you're talking, you feel like they're not being heard, something's happening, you stand up and keep talking. People will actually look at you again. So there are a number of ways like that you can use. The key is, and it goes back to the fear point again, the key is you just got to try it. And if you can't do it, get somebody else to do it for you. Another question? Yes? Go ahead.
I have a couple questions. So first, what are you reading? If there's like something you read every day, or is there a book that you keep going back to because you reinterpret it every time? So I want to know kind of like what you're filling your head with. And then tactically, how do you communicate that you're interested in being on boards? Is just casual with friends, you give them a spiel every time you go to dinner? Or is there a more formal way that you're communicating, hey, I'm interested if you hear anything, I'd love an assist?
Sure. So first, what am I reading? So I read The Economist, I read The Times, I read The Week. Those are the ones that I try to read and are the ones that come in, and that's both digital and in print. I actually do both. In terms of books, there aren't really books that I go back to over and over again. So I don't really have one of those. What am I reading right now? I'm listening to audio. I do the audiobooks. But I'm listening to Brave the Wilderness. And I'm also, hang on a minute, I'm trying to think of the one that I just started in terms of reading one. My problem with digital, I don't know if you guys have this problem too, you no longer see the cover every time, so that you start reading and you're reading it, but it's like the book and the title and all that kind of disappears when you're reading digital. So anyway, I apologize, but that's the one I usually have one that I'm listening to and one that I'm reading in terms of on my Kindle, but that's where I am. With regards to boards, you want to tell people who actually are somehow related to the boardroom. So you want to tell people that are currently sitting on boards. You want to tell people who are in the boardroom. Who's in the boardroom with board members? lawyers, accountants, HR consultants, right? All these, you tell all of these people. You tell search firms. And the reason you tell everyone is if they hear of something, you literally want them to think about you. But you can't just say, I'm interested in boards. Because, okay, what you want to tell them is, I'm interested in serving on a board, and these are the 2 skills that I bring. When boards look to add resources or members to their boards, they actually have a skills matrix. Well-run boards do. And they look for very specific skills. So it's not just I want to add somebody, but it's that I want to add someone who has global experience with a financial background and knows the construction industry, right? I mean, it literally is like that. So if you aren't sharing what skills you actually have, then you're still not going to come to mind when people are thinking of things. So be specific on the skills you have and tell people. And then also ask for feedback on, when you tell them, do you think I actually have the capabilities, the experience, whatever that it takes? You want to ask that question and get qualified. Because if they don't, then actually telling them isn't going to help. So you got to find out what is it you're missing and then go figure out how you rectify that, or you add that experience or add that skill so that you can indeed move forward. Question here, and then we'll go there.
I'm just curious, since you've had experience now with 4 large corporate boards, what makes a well-run board? And have you really been surprised? What have you learned in terms of what makes the board run well?
Okay, so the question is, what makes a well-run board? And have I been surprised by anything I've seen in that category? A well-run board is one where there is good trust and communication between board members and management, where there is transparency, there's candor, and people speak their minds, give feedback, are probing and challenging, and yet supportive. And where people know their roles. And what I mean by that is a board understands what their role is, each board member, and the management theirs, versus board members thinking they run the company, and because all of those things happen too. So those are the elements, and you have to have the right skill sets for all that to actually work right. So if everybody's the same, or that poses a challenge too. In terms of surprise, what's interesting when you look at corporate boards is there is a variety. There are very well-run boards, and there are very dysfunctional boards, and they're definitely out there. So one of the things I've always been very careful of in doing diligence is trying to find boards that are actually high-functioning with good people, the whole bit, because getting on one that isn't would be really, really challenging and really hard. Yeah, and it's real work. 400 pages. I mean, it's a whole. Every meeting. It's a lot. It's a lot of work. Okay, question over here.
So you've worked for a number of large corporations. What would you say is the best way to deal with when your personal values conflict with what the company values are? So we talked a little bit about courage and those types of things, but if you're just a cog in the wheel of a 400,000 person company, and they're doing something that you don't find personally ethical, what do you do then?
Okay, so the question is, given I've worked for a number of large companies, what do you do when your personal values aren't consistent with the values of the company? All right. If the company's doing something that it goes against your ethics and you believe in general is just not ethical, first thing you have to do is you've got to raise it. Back to courage, you've got to raise it. And you need to raise it with senior execs, because you'd be surprised. Sometimes they don't know, and give it a chance to be rectified. If you raise it and people just blow over it, then you know that they actually do know that it's going on and they're okay with it. You need to leave. That's my personal opinion. It's very hard to work as hard as you do when you go to work and commit your career to something that is tied to a set of practices and behaviors that you don't agree with. So I think you have to leave. But before you leave, try. Try to raise it, try to get it fixed, try to make it better. And then if it doesn't work, then you have to leave. Another question back here, and then we'll go over there. Oh, she's going to come up to the mic.
Yes, cheer it on.
Good evening.
Good
So
evening.
on that note, I recently relocated to the Bay about 6 months ago. I left a Fortune 100 that I'd been at for 5 years, came out here to work for a startup, and after 6 months, quit last week because of some ethical issues, knowing that the integrity wasn't there. It was becoming a very toxic environment. And most importantly, my boss was just a poor people leader. So as I search for new roles here in the area, one thing that I wanted to ask you about was experiences you've had with poor leadership or a poor boss, and how you dealt with that situation and what you learned from it and how that helped you grow as a leader.
I've definitely had some bad bosses. Definitely had bad bosses. So how do you deal with it? Well, there's different ways to deal with it. So I once had a boss that just wasn't a good leader, and so I just stepped in. Right? So it was, when I say I just stepped in, so I ended up kind of being the default leader for the team. So the team came to me, even though we were all peers, right, versus to him, and we just got stuff done anyway, because I still had to get my job done. And his issue was he just wasn't a great leader. He knew what needed to be done, he probably knew a lot of things, he just didn't really know how to inspire people and get people, that kind of thing, so I just filled that gap. So I've had that kind of boss. I had a boss that, frankly, was trying to keep me. And by trying to keep me, not making opportunities available to me to be promoted, because he was just trying to keep me. And that one, was a matter of just going over their head for a skip-level interview, and that was a fascinating one. So here's one where I've been asking about being promoted, about new opportunities, and just being told, there really aren't any yet. Yes, you're doing a good job, and yes, we're trying, da-da-da. And so I finally got a meeting with his boss, and I raised the same issue about, I'm surprised there's no new opportunities. You've told me this, that, and the other. He said, oh, well, Shellye, but you don't want to move, and there just aren't opportunities here that da-da-da-da. And I said to him, who told you I don't want to move? I said, I've already moved 3 times. Why wouldn't I want to move for an opportunity? But that's what my boss had portrayed in his thing to keep me. So there are a lot of ways that bosses can be bad, right? The key is decide what you have to do. So that particular one, I had to go over the head and have the meeting, and then once the second line knew it, then I got an opportunity pretty quickly. The one that wasn't a good leader, but he was a good person, just wasn't a good leader, I just filled that gap to enable us to go forward. So it really depends upon in which way the person's a bad boss, and then figuring out, number one, can you work around it anyway? Or do you have to go find a new boss? But there's a lot to learn if you can work around it anyway, because you're going to have a lot of bad bosses. I'm just telling you. So you might as well get used to how to work with them now. If you keep leaving every time, you're going to have a career that shows that you're just moving all around, and people are going to think it's you. So don't always leave. Figure out how you work within the situation. Learn from that, because it'll actually make you a better leader and a better professional.
Actually, want to echo that. And I'm not half as wonderful as Shellye, but I've had my fair share of bad bosses. And so to your question, I think there's actually a lot to learn. I actually learn a lot from the worst bosses that I've had. And there were a couple of things. So the first is you learn how not to be. Things that you shouldn't be doing when you become a boss. You're like, this is terrible. I do not want to do that, right, to anyone. And so you learn to be more self-aware of that. The second is you also learn how to build bridges with more senior people across the board, because I've had managers that they would do the same thing. They would block you, right? No visibility, you can't grow. And what that allowed me to do is I need to find a way to get that visibility. And so I figure out a way to talk to those more senior leaders. And there's a number of other things, but the great thing is you learn from it. Either because you develop these skills, or also you learn what not to do when as a leader as well.
For sure. There was one in the back over here, I think. Yes.
What have you
Oh boy. The question was, what have been some of the barriers that I've seen, especially for women and people of color in terms of raising capital? So, unfortunately, a lot of investing is pattern recognition. And we haven't had enough women and people of color that have actually raised money, built businesses that generated the returns to create a pattern that people recognize. And therefore, we don't fit the current pattern that's in a lot of people's minds. And that makes it very challenging. The good news is, even though there's small percentages, but there are more and more funds that are being led by women and people of color who have a whole different view on what the pattern looks like. So, things are frankly better now by a long shot than they were 16 years ago when I was first trying to raise money. So that's good news. Now, is it anywhere close to where it needs to be? The answer is no. But that's definitely one of the challenges is around just the pattern recognition. The other thing is there's actually a fantastic YouTube, and I'm not going to remember her name, by a woman who did a bunch of research around pitches, when people went to pitch for money, and what the questions were that the CEOs or the people raising money were asking. And one of the things that they learned is when it was a woman pitching, this one happened to be more women, when it was a woman pitching, the questions that came from the investors were on the negative side versus the positive side. So if it was a man pitching, they'd ask, well, how much opportunity? How big is the market? If a woman was pitching, they'd say, well, why do you think that market's going to get any bigger than what it is today? Now, same question, but see how it was done differently? And so what that does is it takes you down this rat hole that you're now talking in a negative way. Well, it's not going to be small. Well, that's negative, right? So what you have to do is to learn to ignore how the question is asked and always speak in the positive. So when they say, why don't you think that what makes you think it's going to get any bigger than it is, you have to talk about the fact that actually the size of the market is huge and it's growing because of X, Y, Z. You don't start here where they're bringing you. You have to stay up here. That's hard, all right? But it is doable. And this is why, talk about doing your research. I'm just a huge believer. One of the things I always say, and I just did a bunch of posts on this, is homework does not stop in school. You have to do your homework all the time. And to me, doing the research is doing the homework, because there's a lot of data and information out there to be able to leverage to help you do whatever you're doing better. So look for some of these things that are out there. But there's data. Good news is there's data, there's research, and there's ways to counterbalance. There's a question here, and then I'll come over here.
You're a planner.
Oh, yeah.
And I hear early in life you set a goal to be a CEO. And you work with that. So you're at a different stage in your life. So I'm curious, what is your planning horizon now? And what goals are you setting?
All right. Okay, so this is going to be, I know you didn't mean it to be, but this is actually going to be an emotional answer. So I've been a planner my whole life. I've always had a long-term goal that I've been working towards and short-term steps to get there, et cetera. Some of you in the audience know, but maybe not everybody in the audience knows, but my husband passed away last year. And I was never able to plan beyond my husband. He had a terminal cancer, so we knew one day this is how it would end. But I was just never able to envision, plan, think about what life would be like in terms of without him, and therefore set those goals. So for the first time in my life, I actually don't have, here's the long-term goal. What I've got instead, and the way I'm operating, is I've got the short-term goals. And I'm trying to leave myself open for the first time in, I don't know how old I am, 57 years, for the first time to what might happen and what might be possible. So I'm in a different place than I've ever been, and I'm uncomfortable. I'm just telling you right now, I am uncomfortable. One back there. Well, thank you, Merlene.
So one of the things that I've been thinking about is how do we encourage women and women of color to be okay with being the first to be a pioneer, either in the boardroom or in their wherever they decide to go. Like coming out here, there aren't a lot of us. So I'd love for you to talk about that, because I think that's the one thing I think will keep us from envisioning what's possible if we're afraid of being the first, whether it's in the boardroom or what have you. So I'd love for you to talk about that.
Thank you.
Sure.
I think it comes down to, number one, being inspired and realizing that in any area, any field, any role, any location, there was always somebody who was first, no matter what their background was, whether it was the first man to step on the moon, or it was the first woman to do this, or the first Hispanic to do that, or the first, I mean, the first happening, the good news is the first happening all the time. And I would hope that people would not do something, or not, I guess it's a double negative, right? Would not do something because they're afraid that it would be the first. All they have to do is define it broader. Okay, so you might be the first, I was the first African-American CEO in a Kleiner Perkins portfolio company, right? But I was not the first African-American CEO, right? So you define it broadly. If you're afraid of being the first, just define the universe bigger. We do that in sales all the time. You just define the opportunity bigger, right? So I would hope that people would realize that everybody's the first at something at some point. And so keep moving. And plus, just by doing it, you just help so many others in terms of, break that barrier or break that wall. Yeah.
Looks like we have time for two or three more questions.
Okay, there's one in the blue shirt, and then right here. Oh, Jim. Mm-hmm.
I'm in a situation where I work with a lot of young women in STEM areas. Where would you send someone who is very capable, female, and they, say, maybe in their 20s, 35, and they can pick up some of these skills that you're talking about in a more formal way? I mean, what would you recommend? Maybe I'm talking about like mass and anything, at least to get them up to say the right attitude.
Okay, I understand the question. So you're asking where can people go, young professionals go who are in tech, whatever, to learn some of the techniques and approaches and things we're talking about here tonight? Is that what you're asking?
Corporate ready. In other words, they're totally ready to tech.
Yes.
And you can have a discussion with them like you just had.
Right.
But maybe it's this period, I think they need a practice school.
Yeah. Exactly.
When you get in that,
Yeah.
okay, outside, so they can get comfortable with doing what you do in the corporation.
Okay, I got it. So the question is, how do you take someone who's now spent time, gotten the education, they now have technical skills, but how do you now help them with, how do you actually take that, work and thrive in a corporate setting? So, are there institutions, are there places to go, classes to do, et cetera? I'm not aware of here are classes and things, but what I am aware of is there's a number of professionally oriented organizations that actually can be helpful in that arena. And whether it is, I think, and I'd have to think, because I'm like, okay, what would they be? But when I think of professional organizations, there are, like here in the Bay Area, there's an organization called Upward, which is a group that's focused on women and women rising up in corporations. And they do a lot of dinners and roundtables, and get-togethers. It's informal, but it gives people a chance to interact in an informal way, create relationships, and therefore, right, do and aspire. There's organizations like Watermark. There's a number of different things. I think it's important to get engaged so that you're actually around others that are in those environments, create those relationships, and then get that informal and or formal, right, mentoring or support. All right, there was one here.
And I know your passion for mentoring, and in your discussions, you haven't, you alluded to it, but you haven't specifically talked about, I know you have a passion for mentoring, not only professionally, I know you do it with your family members or whatever, and I know you said that you're intentional. So where does that passion, I mean, how does that spirit of mentoring, how does that play into your grand scheme? Is it just something that you like to do, or how does that play into who Shellye is?
Yeah, I feel very fortunate with what I've been able to do, experience, and accomplish. And I have absolutely not done this all by myself. People have helped me in different ways all along. And I personally feel compelled, and I know that's a strong word, but I mean it, I feel compelled to help others. And frankly, I do it when they don't even ask. I mean, which is, Alfredo and I were having a quick conversation before this whole thing started, and he was telling me